Global markets continue to grapple with ongoing volatility, largely driven by escalating trade tensions and geopolitical uncertainty. At the heart of much of this is the evolving relationship between the United States and China. My next guest says what we're witnessing is a decoupling, one that spans economic influence, military power, and global strategic dominance. Roman Schweizer is managing director at TD Cowen Washington Research Group, and he joins us now. Roman, it's good to see you. So I have a nice, simple question to start off with, and this might be the only question I get to ask you. But, you know, the tariff dispute, I think a lot of people understand, is part of a much larger thing that is happening around the world. What do you see for the future of global balance of power and the future world order? Where are we going with this? What is the end state that could happen?
Sure. Well, Kim, it's great to be with you, and as always. And you know, I have perhaps not jokingly referred to it as sort of New World disorder. You know, really, we have some of the fundamental economic and security underpinnings in multiple regions around the world, sort of all being reset, a hard reset almost, all at once. And you know, I know that the larger you know, global economic reset that the Trump administration, sort of the button they pushed on Liberation Day, has really influenced and impacted financial markets. There's a much broader, discussion going on about geopolitics and security, both in Asia and in Europe, even the Middle East. And so you see this all at once, and front and center in that is obviously when you have the largest and second largest economies in the world butting heads. That's going to cause a lot of waves.
There's a lot of headlines flying, and I mean, this is, I guess, what I'm hoping to get from you is signal from noise. But we get, you know, tariffs on you, and then tariffs on you, and then, you know, open for a trade deal, not open for a trade deal. Negotiations have started, they've stopped. What do you see happening? Like, what do you think? And again, you know, where are we going with China and the U.S.? Where is it going to net out?
Sure. Well, I think that one thing, you know, perhaps many of us have forgotten or purged from our memories was the sort of difficulty between the U.S. and China of getting to the phase one agreement in Trump 1. And so there was certainly some back and forth, but nothing in more tactical skirmishing using tariffs, nothing in sort of the thermonuclear versions that we have being used today with, you know, tariff rates, you know, above 100% and then being sort of ratcheted back and forth and applied on different sectors. But this is really sort of max pressure in terms of the tariff back and forth. And I think neither the U.S. or China are the same as they were, you know, call it, 8 years ago. And so both President Trump and President Xi are in different positions politically. The countries are in different positions economically. And honestly, the world has shifted as well. So the parameters of this fight are much, much different. And while the large focus is on trade, again, as you referenced, and I contend that this is really about 21st century dominance in terms of you know, sort of the rules of the road in geopolitics, security, technology, and trade.
So, you know, we kind of look in terms of who's got the stronger position when you're negotiating. And I mean, you know, again, when you consider everything, it's difficult sometimes with things changing as much. And you mentioned even the different, you know, their own popularity, let's say, as leaders and those types of things as well. But what are you watching to understand how this will unfold?
Sure. So, I mean, I think one of the things is, you know, as the leadership within the Trump administration at the cabinet secretary level, right? You've got varying, you know, I guess to use the phrase team of rivals, right? Differing views, different opinions within the White House. You know, is the Trump administration unified of thought? Probably not, right? You've got the Treasury Secretary and Commerce Secretary sort of pushing one agenda or one type of plan, and then some more hawkish members, National Security Advisor, Secretary of State. Obviously, they have a different worldview or even a more hawkish view towards China and others. And I think the one variant or variable that folks really haven't considered is the difference in approach that we kind of all knew was coming, but you know, the European factor, the EU factor. President Trump has decided to take up a trade war also with the EU, whereas under the Biden administration, and perhaps even towards the tail end of the first Trump administration, we were kind of looking at the U.S. and EU versus China, and maybe versus or against is not the right term, right? But now it's almost like there are multiple independent variables, and the EU is wondering, hey, which way do I go here, and what's better long term for us?
How long do you think it's going to take? I mean, are you able to say when you think there could be a deal, if you think there will be a deal between the U.S. and China? Like, is this going to take, weeks, months, years? What is your sense right now?
I think it's tough. I mean, I think does the Trump administration want a headline win that, sort of like phase one that then was never adhered to? I mean, but again, U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer has talked about China's decision to not adhere to phase one, and of course there was COVID and other complicating factors that went along with that. So is there something measurable in terms of the trade deficit that can be achieved? But then again, we still have other issues, right? Such as TikTok, such as access to semiconductors, such as new areas such as rare earths and pharmaceuticals and other segments of the economy that weren't part of the discussion last term. And so I do think this idea of decoupling some critical areas where China has leverage over the U.S. economy and perhaps global economy is something that's going to continue, regardless of whether there's a sort of handshake deal within the next, call it 3 months, maybe. And that decoupling is really a feature, not a bug, of this ongoing relationship.
I want to ask about Taiwan just before we head to break, but what is your latest thought on that? The last time I talked to you, I want to say it was a good 6 months ago, Roman, and I think it was in a slightly different place. Where do you see it playing out now?
Well, the head of U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, Admiral Sam Paparo, testified to the Senate last week. He's the guy who would be in charge of defending Taiwan or fighting China, however you want to call it. And the one thing that he stressed is that we've seen more and more, I think over a 300% increase in Chinese military activities around Taiwan. And I think that the really important thing is that he described these are not military exercises, but these are dress rehearsals for the forcible unification with Taiwan. And they have really increased in their scope and span and ability to sort of put a dome over Taiwan to encircle the island. And so, as Xi Jinping has talked about, that he had wanted, sort of a 2027 timeline in terms of the ability to perhaps do that and make that decision. And obviously, look, the world has, certainly the U.S. and largely the world has not decoupled from Taiwanese semiconductors at TSMC. And I think it's also something else very important to think about. And I'm relying on this stat not from myself, but from semiconductor experts, that 95% of the world's leading edge semiconductor fabrication capacity is within 100 miles, because most people think, okay, well, that's TSMC in Taiwan, but you also have Samsung, which is, within artillery range of North Korea, and which is, about 100 miles from China. So, I mean, it is still China has a lot of leverage, and it just depends on what levers it and how serious it wants to be.
I want to start talking about Iran. We'll put China aside for a moment. Tell me, what you see happening right now, and again, just the escalation that's been taking place.
Sure. I think this is one of the most fascinating areas. I mean, obviously, we've seen the, sort of U.S. China relationship, knew that was coming, Russia and Ukraine, but really the events in the Middle East over the last 2 years have really been tectonic. Obviously, you've had the horrible incidents back and forth between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. Hezbollah has been neutralized in Lebanon. You've had the collapse of the Syrian government and a new government there. And then you've had sort of the ongoing fight between, well, the Houthis and the Israelis and the U.S. military. So the region has been incredibly volatile and active. But really, the one centerpiece, as U.S. defense officials, national security officials have talked about it, is Iran has been that key player in the region. And many of their clients or proxies in the region have been severely weakened. And of course, there is the larger issue of Iran potentially getting a nuclear weapon, which certainly the Israelis would not like to see, the Saudis would not like to see, and I really doubt President Trump would like to go down in history as, you know, being the U.S. president under which Iran went nuclear. So the stakes could not be higher, but also the change could potentially not be greater. I think people within the Trump administration believe this is a generational opportunity to sort of reset the strategic outlines within the Gulf region. The first foreign leader to call President Trump was Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia. President Trump's first trip will be to the Middle East next month. He will be visiting Saudi. I'm not suggesting he's going to make a surprise visit to Iran like he did to North Korea to meet with Kim Jong-un. I think the emphasis for negotiations or some type of action will be at a premium over the next, call it 60 to 90 days.
I think it's all fascinating. And like you said, these are generational resets in just almost all parts of the world. Hopefully, it can all happen at once in productive ways. But I want to ask you, though, before I let you go, about Ukraine, Russia, European defense spending, of course, which is moving up. But
Sure.
what is your latest and where we are at with that?
Look, I mean, Vladimir Putin is a tough negotiator. I think he thinks he has the upper hand. You've obviously had some unusual back and forth between the President Trump and Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, and the Europeans are kind of wondering what all to make of this. I am not necessarily optimistic that we'll get a sustainable peace deal. I mean, let alone even just a casual ceasefire anytime soon. It does seem like Putin is driving a hard bargain, or perhaps really has no serious intent to stop unless he is made to do so. Look, European defense spending is going up one way or the other, whether that's a distrust of Vladimir Putin or distrust of Donald Trump. Basically, 22 of 32 alliance members spend the 2% of GDP. Most NATO foreign ministers are sort of talking about going up to 3.5% of GDP. That's an additional $300 billion a year on defense. And I think that is probably one of the larger sustainable stories. Certainly European economies are going to have to figure out how to find that spending. But again, there is some benefit to that in terms of, these are high-tech industries in many cases and positive for jobs. And I would imagine a lot of that European spending will probably over time be spent on more European products. I mean, that's one of the sort of points of contention right now with the risk to U.S. defense companies.
Yeah, and I was just going to ask you, just to wrap up, I mean, that U.S. defense spending, that, I'm sure there's so many interesting things in terms of what it is spent on versus what it used to be spent on. And then to your point, where it is spent, as, you hear, President Trump talk about the fact that, you may get some version of something, but maybe not the best version because of whatever reason. It's probably put a chill on a few things, right?
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, again, going back to around the election and the announcement of DOGE and other things, I think there was a sense that U.S. defense spending was going down, or that it was going to be, because of the larger issues about structural financing and debt and whatnot. I have been of the opinion that it's going to go up, and that I have found it difficult to believe that a Republican president and Republican Congress would cut spending. I'm not right yet, but it's looking like I may be. President Trump talked about a $1 trillion defense budget. Both the House and Senate have passed a reconciliation bill that would include $150 billion in mandatory spending for defense, so that would be additive as well. And I think the idea of shifting focus to really the Indo-Pacific gets to that larger issue, kind of like what you were talking about. Excuse me, about technology. So the nuclear triad. President Trump has talked about missile defense, which is now, as you might suspect, appropriately monitored as Golden Dome. And then, of course, there is a shipbuilding executive order in terms of talking about increasing U.S. shipbuilding, both military and commercial. So, I mean, there is a real big focus on increased spending, and then particular areas of that this administration, I think, is going to continue to press over the next several years.